Today, Rinpoche began the section in The Source of All My Good on training the mind in the stages of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity. And this evening on the medium scope, or the paths for beings of medium capacity. Okay. Jebitse Lotutsewa.
Some Talani Chibusa drink to Saji the Gendoje, Sambajan, Samba the Jebitse, Tela Lutusewa, Tabatribal, larger than Lani Chibusaji Katula, Saji Kazan Kutan or Kudu could each angle Deja and could Lani Chibutan, the Kuta the Great, Saji.
Okay, so when we look at the section in the text, the Source of All My Good, we find the section that deals with the medium scope right here. Page 40, if you turn, if you have the text in front of you. Bless me to perceive all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. They are the door to every pain I have. Grant me then to strive instead for the happiness of freedom. So this is a section deals with then Nanda Sampa de Yomarebe.
Nanda Sampa Nanda Jebe Mongo Dunga Kunjugo, Ede Monosi Pensuji, Yemen Tabi the Walla, Penny Chamber Jawashi Sonde, what the Telge Sambajan, somebody Jebise, Tela Ludusa was soon to what they take them by Saint Dua. Jebe Mongo Dunga Kunjugo, Ede Monosi Pensu du, that let the Jumbo Onkishon, and the CB Pensu made the war. The Wallace of the Sukalo, Eden Romares, Eden Monosi Pensu J, Tetabi, Sibu Pensul Yemi, Juniors, June the Rene, and Yemi and Tabi the Wallace, Tabi the Wa. Doing the Tabi the Wa, the Wallet, and 20 Championship was in Jelus. Doing the Tabi the Wa, Karsagore. Yemen in Tabi the Walla, Dungel Tai, and the Tabi the Wa Tundu Lutan Ganusama Marble, think Ganusama Tenton do Samba. Yemen in Tabi the Was. Ku Pansul and Yemen in there, Ku and Dungaji Dungan Ju, Dunga Shabbat Dungela Soba to Sukalo, Ku Yemen the Rine, and the Ku Dungel Tai, and the Tabi the Wa. Tabi the Walla 20 Championship was in Rose, what taking a new summer tending with way. No summer Jan said what they tell her to do. That's somebody Chibi said, somebody Chibi said what they don't do this. Lotu Sewa Teresa, Lotu Sewa, and the crew penciling about you and I knew somebody near Tugian letters, near Tugian, and the Shantu Sambaso, the Nalaj and the Jigum say, Lotu to what they do.
Then JPC,
제비 세도 때마다 내주다 나다 상제제 신바 매나 라면 상주제 편수주 좀뭐주 가서 내주다 나니 예생부도 타바되냐로 손나 뜻은 제발라스 어떤 선바 제비 세도 제가 도도 내서는 되게 도다
then Jipa.
제바 타바되면 라제라제 때라 보버와 어때 나다 선바티 장바이 전다 시에 바이션베 템비자와 수수 타발라 루바 녀버셔바 신주로서 어떻게 타바드베 라제라제 때라 보거든 대구스 나다 선바스는 간루 선바마르베 간루 선바티 장비 전다 시에 바이션베 템비자와 수수 타발라 루바 녀버셔바 신주로 수트 라바소는 수트 두 때바르마도 주진지 라바 땡한지 라바 싫어 라바 그거 어떤 조구로다
Lesso.
타바드를 하지래 때라 보거든 니발자 도무들 사지 송도 도무는 주선은 디사
Okay. So the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, we find that there are 4 categories that deal with this specific section on the training the mind in the stage of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity. We find first the mental training, and then second we find the measure of the attitude. Third category we find dispelling misconceptions, and then the fourth category is ascertaining the path that leads to liberation. So the first category that deals with the mental training is referring to renunciation, a desire to definitely emerge. So here we see, bless me to perceive that all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. So here, even the good things of this life in the higher realms of cyclic existence are plagued with suffering. Even the gods and humans have to endure the various types of suffering, the suffering of change, the suffering of suffering, the pervasive compounded suffering. So once one recognizes that these types of sufferings are the drawbacks or the negativities of cyclic existence, then the practitioner desires to definitely emerge from cyclic existence altogether. Here it says to strive for the happiness of freedom. So this is what the mental training is referring to. It's referring to just that desire to definitely emerge. And then the second category, which is the measure of the determination to be free, or the measure of that renunciation, we find in Lama Tsongkhapa's 3 principal paths the line that is the qualification of whether or not renunciation is there or not. So it's the measure of it. It's whether or not renunciation has been produced. So one knows if renunciation has been produced if by constant meditation, your mind will not entertain a moment's wish even for the successes of this life, and you will aim for freedom all day and night. So you no longer look for the things of this life, and you aim for liberation all day and night. You have this desire to definitely emerge all day and night. So this is the measure of that determination to be free. And then the next category, dispelling misconceptions, we get to later on in the text, and we find that there is an idea raised that is wrong and has to be negated, and that is that it is only the hearer vehicles, the Hinayana practitioners, the Nyantu Dan Ranjel, the Lutu Selwa, Nyantu Dan Ranjel, the Nipa Jumwa Jehudu.
Odel Tubatan Wada, calling about you and you somewhat near Tugnales, and the Shantu sempre Tenyalet in the Digamudu.
The Nyantu Dan Ranjel, Kalen, just Nyantu La. Okay. So this doubt that arises is that this practice of renunciation or desire to definitely emerge is a hearer's practice, and that it isn't something that the bodhisattva desires to have because of desiring to be in cyclic existence. So this is negated later on in the text. So this is what it is meant by dispelling misconceptions. It's that misconception that this isn't a practice of the bodhisattva. And then we have this last category of ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. And then we find we move forward. Grant me that these pure thoughts may lead me to be watchful and to recall what I should be doing. Grant me to give the greatest care to make the vows of morality the essence of my practice. They are the root of Buddhist teaching. So in this section then, which is the ascertaining the path leading to liberation, we find the subject of the three highest higher trainings. The highest higher training in ethics, the highest higher training in concentration, and the highest higher training in wisdom. So these are the four categories in a summarized fashion, but this section deals with analyzing the various drawbacks and negativities of cyclic existence by looking at the various sufferings and so forth that even the gods and humans are plagued with, and then getting a desire to emerge not only from the lower realms but from the higher realms as well. So, and a desire to achieve nirvana or liberation. Digson Rinpoche.
다 집에 뭐 동행 근처에 대모로서 편수 예매된 탑에 도와라 되니 첨부저 시절로서 어때 동행 대비 예매 다 근주 구윤조리 도대 예매 살아마베나 타바더니 제시면시시 근주 구윤조리 마서나 그저 주주면시베 실행은 주시 때부터 코어 관계지 마시바지 나리 되네 말베 나리 되네 어떤 수가 잡고도다 So then we so
then this is a very summarized way of putting these topics forward. And if we look at the abbreviated stages on the path, the Lamrim Duden, we find a little bit more of an expanded explanations, which states, if you do not make an effort to think about true sufferings and their drawbacks, you will not properly develop a keen interest to work for liberation. If you do not consider the stages whereby true origins of all suffering place and keep you in cyclic existence, you will not know the means for cutting the root of this vicious circle. Therefore, you should cherish, exuding total disgust and renunciation of such existence, while knowing which factors bind you to its wheel. I, the yogi, have practiced just that. If you would also seek liberation, please cultivate yourself in the same way. So those are, that is the expanded explanation of, but we find the same implicit information in the source of all my good within it.
다들 가도로 때 동에다 근육은 코알 그 수다 된데라 준이고는 코알 그 준이셔 어디 된고도다 된데라 준이고는 코알 그 수산에 능가요 삼바 동에다 근육은 코알 그 수산에 능가요 삼바 줄라죠 신조로 어디 그간데 조금데.
And if one wishes to look at it in a more thorough fashion, in order to develop the mind that definitely wishes to get out, by recognizing the drawbacks of sufferings and so forth, and then wishing to abandon the origin of them, one would then look at the 12 links of dependent origination, and this is a more expanded explanation of the drawbacks of cyclic existence.
어제다 나다 삼바티 잠바 어레 다도는 어떤 중 삼바 집이체 삼바장원다 삼바티 집이체 나다 삼바티 예생군 타바드냐로 써야 들어와
맞아.
로또 세와서도 어때 코알링에 봐주는 중 삼바니 최근년에스
맞아.
샤주 세메드냐래 지는 지금은 도서 도와주셔서 어도 올세도
맞아.
나는 좀 올도.
So the mental training deals with the determination to be free, the desire to definitely emerge. The measure of the determination to be free is whether there is this a desire to be liberated day and night, as it states in the three principal paths, that a moment's wish, you will not entertain a moment's wish even for the successes of this life, and you will aim for freedom all day and night. Then you experience transcendent renunciation. So again, that is the measure of that renunciation, or the determination to be free. And then the dispelling misconceptions section deals with a qualm that's presented, or a wrong idea that's presented, that states that the practice of renunciation is really a hearer's practice and is not a practice of for the bodhisattva. So this is the section on dispelling misconceptions. That's what the section on dispelling misconceptions deals with.
다치 동부지대 동에 내봐도 군주대반이 됐어. 니바 나다 상바세 어떻게 우대도 나대 되고요서는 되기도.
So the first stanza that we were reading deals with suffering and the origin of suffering. Bless me to perceive all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. They are the door to every pain I have. Grant me then to strive instead for the happiness of freedom. And then the next section deals with the Nanda Sampa, the Lande.
Nanda Sampa ti Jamba song du ngai nyu Sampa ro Sampa. Ti Jamba itne chuti ji laba, tinga ji laba, shera laba zu te tian san ti do Lande.
So then we find in the next section the path. Goden Yomar Lande.
Goden the Lande ni ka o ti tian.
Okay, so in the next section we find the true paths and true cessations being presented, because we are able to achieve that by practice of the three highest higher trainings. So that is grant that these pure, and this is ascertaining the path leading to liberation in the fourth category, and it reads, grant that these pure thoughts may lead me to be watchful and to recall what I should be doing. Grant me to give the greatest care to make the vows of morality the essence of my practice. They are the root of Buddhist teaching.
What the Dambaji to what the Kulu Dambi goes, and then Dunga Papi Dambo, then the Gunu Papi Dambo, then the Goba Papi Dambo, then the Lam Papi Dambo, the Jing Wall and Devas, then Dunga Papi Dambo, then the Gunu Papi Dambo, need the Tambutan, then the Goba Papi Dambo, then the Lam Papi Dambo said what the Shimata dance and Dua, Lam Papi Dambo was, the Jing Wall and Devas, the Jing Wall Marba. 다 니바 대지 올란데 셰발데 니바 셰발데 바들레 동에 셰바샤 군주 봉샤 고방고도 라공바샤스 어디 다 동에 가부 매자 안 어디 동에 봉고 동에 군주 봉고레스 동에 셰바샤 군주 봉샤 아는 고방고도샤 아는 동에 봉고데 동고샤 고레 디죠 아는 라데 고도샤 고레스 라파비 데바 마르베
Okay.
Dunga Shebasha, Kunju Bongasha, Gobangotis, Lagumbashas. I know what that Molan Deva Sheba and the Shawan Deva the Deva Dela, Dunga Shebasha, the Shebashame, Kunju Bongasha, Bongashame, Gobangotis, Ngotishame, Lagumbasha, Gombashames, what is about the Marva? Dunga Deva Sheb Gorete, and then Deba to be Dunga Deva Shea Maris, Dunga Shebasha, Shebashames. Dunga deba shea yuare, she gugurete, deba to be dunga deba shea yumare, dunga deba gola deba madubare, tendi in the dema madubi chagures. What is the tend marbe? Dunga shebasha the shebashame, Kunju Bua, Kunju leda you, Kunju Pungurete, deba to be Kunju Bua yumars, deba to be Kunju mebe. Langung gurete, deba to be Langua yumare. Tabatu gurete, never to be Tabatu, never to be Tabatan, and a lamb measure. What the tending is a marba, Shibasha, the Shibasham, what the.
So the Buddha presented the Four Noble Truths in three different ways. He first stated that this is the superior truth of suffering and this is the superior truth of origin. So that would be this first stanza. Then he stated this is the superior truth of cessation and this is the superior truth of path. This would be that second, the later stanza. And then the Buddha stated that suffering is to be understood, origin is to be abandoned, cessation to be achieved, and path to be relied upon. So it is in order to achieve liberation or cessation, one has to have the cause. So the cause of that liberation is the pathway which leads to it. So path is to be relied upon. So then, after that, the Buddha stated that there is no suffering to understand. There is no origin to abandon, there is no cessation to achieve, and there is no path to rely upon. So the first set of explanations is the explanation of the nature of the truths, or the definition of the truths. This is the superior truth of suffering, origin, cessation, and path. The next is the thought process of the truths. And then the last category deals with the actual reality of the truths. So what is meant by there is no suffering to abandon? So there is suffering, suffering that there is no suffering to understand. So there is a suffering that one has to understand, but there is no truly established suffering that one has to understand. There is an origin to abandon, but there is not any truly established origin to be abandoned. There is a cessation to achieve, but there is not a truly established cessation to achieve. And there is a path to rely upon or meditate upon, but there is no truly established path to rely upon or meditate upon. So this is what was meant by these three different ways that the Buddha turned the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, of the Four Noble Truths.
Sheja, Ponja, Ribasha, Tempachis, Julama, Puji, Tango, Dunga, Nandabores, Kunjun, Nag, Junamores, then Landen, Pandabores, Godente, and then Pensana, Natatavandables, what the Nan Sheja, Naj Jun Ponjala, then Toja, Pen and Tempashawa, Dunga, Jutan, Tonguba, the Tijila. Sheja, Monja Ribasha, Tempachis. What is it? What
so then we find in Maitreya's text called the Sublime Continuum 4 examples that are given to explain the Four Noble Truths. First, the truth of suffering is compared to an illness, and the origin of suffering is compared to the cause of an illness. The cessation of suffering is compared to attaining health or getting rid of the illness, and the path is compared to the actual remedy that one takes in order to become healthy. So it reads as follows: recognize that you are ill, eliminate the cause of the illness, attain health, rely on a remedy. Likewise, you should recognize, eliminate, attain, and rely upon suffering, its cause, its cessation, and the path, respectively.
What the Tango, what the Chibi Mungu Kunju, Demon Sip, and Tabi the Walla, Tony Chambachi, what they Samba Jawangu, Nanu Samba Chibi, tell a Lotu Sevason to what they Lani Chambake, Saji Son to one day non dudious.
Lesser.
That Jabba Taba Dribble, Haji, tell about what they not a somebody, Tombai, Tendency, Bayashambi, Tempis or Susu Tabala, Druba Chambershibashi, Penton La Deta, and then net Tabatan Day, Godeni, but what indeed, and Gusana, Lisarva.
So, bless me to perceive all that's wronging with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. They are the door to every pain I have. Grant me then to strive instead for the happiness of freedom. This stanza deals with those first 3 categories in the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment: the mental training, the measure of the determination to be free, and then dispelling misconceptions. And then the next stanza: grant that these pure thoughts may lead me to be watchful and to recall what I should be doing. Grant me to give the greatest care to make the vows of morality the essence of my practice. They are the root of Buddha's teaching. So this is the category which is the 4th in the great treatise, ascertaining the path leading to liberation. And in there, we find the attainment of health and the remedy, as it's stated in Maitreya's text, cessation and path. Bhiksum.
What you talk about the Lari Chibu what in my Ngul Mate Chinamara.
Okay. So okay, so we're going to go to page 265 in the great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment, if you have it, and we went over this already. And I still haven't gotten a chance to, Rinpoche just showed me where in the commentary the specific section is, so I'll be translating these sections with more accuracy of Jamyang Shenpa's commentary over the next 2 weeks. But we'll begin here, and the training the mind in the stage of the past shared in common with beings of medium capacity.
Oten janji be otel sajeni dinware sajeni dine de dendu bi cheto lama da de bil hala sha sawas de dendu bi cheto lama da de bil hala sha sawas and de bi de teba chembi rejen and teba chembi rejen so de bi de and saji go bo de marbe saji go bo de bi cheto lama da Debi hala shatse was, or the Jisun Lama Tamba, Tuji Chamberton Debanala Shatse law said, what he said Shatse was.
So, in this first section, it says, I bow with respect to the revered teachers who have great compassion. So here, this is making a prostration or to the lamas, and then also the fully completed Buddhas and that are the desired deity of the practitioner. So paying homage to those beings. So this is the first section according to Jamyang Shenpa.
Chojudo Dimbare, Junama Tamba, Tuji Chambertaman, La Chatse Lose. That Sanja was Tenma or Tele Saji Sun Dine, Ulmani Ni Udua. Or the Jejun Lama Tamba, Tuji Chambertaman, La Chatse Lose, Chuju Junti Sadeta, Jejun Lama Tamba Son du. That Jirmichi Lama to Jambeya Marbe Jambeya, to Jambeya in Sanjila so to Kanga Yujire. Jizu Lama Tamba Toji Chamber Debanala Shatselo, so what the Jirmichi, the Shatsel.
So here we find this idea of prostration, and J. Rinpoche's root teacher was Manjushri, but we can also say all the Buddhas as well. So here there is a homage to teachers and those who have great compassion, those fully realized beings. And Lama Tsongkhapa, having this connection with Manjushri, implicitly is paying homage to him.
What the Chuba Juba Lama Tama to Chimana Demadala Shatselo, the Chuba Juba.
This is the expression of homage section.
That Chuba Juba Yina. And Jambeya dan Saji dan Lama da to say Yuen June, Chuba Ina, and the Suno Jachusan Nuris, Suna, Marbe, Suno Jachusan Nuris, and then Suno Debitel Dawa Yungre, Dunga Nugre, Suno Demi make some Duris, and then Pashin Chuja Katule, Jachu Dane, Suno Nami Deter, Dunga Tanchi say. So there may some rules. What the Jachu window the John and what the Chuja Kadulu. Tandele in Taburo, that is no Lama Tama Tuji Chamber Daman, non la Shatseva, so non Sagre, so non the Dawayungre, Dunga Nugre, so non the Yobaina, so non they may some rules, so non they may some rules. What does Taburo Marbe?
Me, sample la Drosena?
So no, I will take a Kusan look at you by in a day on Great.
Oh, okay.
So not them, me, someone and Bruce.
Tuchina. So the reason for this expression of homage, sometimes called expression of worship at the beginning, to the teachers, to Manjushri, to the Buddhas, is for the reason for this expression of homage is to gain merit. Because all happiness is achieved by gaining merit, and suffering is abandoned by gaining merit. And we find in the sutra text where it states that the fruition of the accumulation of merit is the abandonment of suffering, and one will achieve whatever one wishes if he or she accumulates this. So here, this is the reason for this at the onset, is to be able to achieve merit for those reasons. Accumulate merit for those reasons.
Niba kuyu tak neba pungu chendinga lala juri basa. Niba kuyu tak neba pungu basa, kuyu ta ane koal dil tumita ayusina meso marbe. Koal tumita me, jao ngama de koal de kadu chungbarisina tuma me baris. Tume jujang, tama tangden bas, koal tuma yu mare, tama yu baris, koal tama. 안 돈이 공부이나 돈에도 공중가네 코아군가노로다 토메 주장 타마타데 코알 토마요 말스 코알 토만데네 쇼바르세 저우투아요 말다 안가 줄레다 녀모모 코아데 정하만 쇼바 땡하만 가 데네 쇼바르세 토마 세종아요 말보다 저알 토마 메바 토마 메바로바 안 타마요들로 다 타마
Then Jayan Sheba, the Chunjing, what is it, Chunjing?
Jajibu Saji Nibatel Tere, Kuyutangaba, Bumbi, Kuyuta Tumita Dan, Shimita Yimarbe, Kual Tumita Yomare, Shimita Yoris, Tony Gun, what to China, Dunga Gunugan Roda.
Okay.
Shimita Yoris, what Tate Nababumbi. Kuyu tada ngaba pombe chedo teba chembi rijen su shanju samba su chebe ding la da chebe chimi la la ures what the dang do sa ta ni ba den ma.
So the section deals with the that one should aspire to become a person of great capacity, because the base even when he or she is a practitioner of the earlier scopes, because those earlier scopes serve as a basis or a foundation for a basis or a foundation for that great scope. So that is the next point that Jayan Sheba makes, and since we have there is no beginning to the cycle of existence. So we have these beginningless rebirths. There's no beginning. But there certainly is an end to cyclic existence, because through meditation on emptiness, one is able to get rid of the truth of suffering and the truth of origin of suffering. But with the karma and afflictions present, we will be brought into another life. So we aren't able to count the number of lives that we have already had in cyclic existence.
What you should not Hindu and then Jewish to the pitch call Tires Logman God is then quote and
So even the Christians and Hindus have this idea of achieving liberation. They just state that God has a part in that.
What the God is
because God created this. Because there is a creation, then there is a way to count or a beginning. There is a beginning. Because there is this creator, there is a beginning in those systems. There isn't this beginninglessness. But in Buddhism, we state that cyclic existence is beginningless. Because of our karma and afflictions, we have been brought into these lives, and we have had previous lives and previous lives and previous lives without any kind of beginning.
Don't to be shared now what is Gombaina and the Kuyu Zawa Tenzin Nundagre, Yamun Nundagre, what the Dungen the Kunju Bombi, on the Tabat Yunguza, called Tamayuaris, Kuyu Tangaba Bombas, what the Marbe?
Don't need to be shared Tenzin Pong, Yomon Pong, Dugel Pong.
What the Bombi Tabayungu, and the Quat and Gano.
So there is certainly an end to cyclic existence. So we say that there is a beginninglessness, but there is an end. Because of the wisdom realizing emptiness, one is able to get rid of the grasping at true establishment, which is the root of cyclic existence, and thereby getting rid of the karma and afflictions, and then thereby getting rid of suffering and getting rid of or abandoning suffering and achieving a liberation. So we find that there is an end to cyclic existence, and that end is brought about by this wisdom realizing emptiness and extinguishing that root of grasping at true establishment. And then by doing so, everything else is abandoned that comes from that.
대들 저와 제수 전바 당서 대들 콩드시바들 ane chewa jesu tenpa dansa le da nyomo mo che sa shinje de la chewa de ngaba yongro da chewa jesu tenpa dans shene ngando ton su sanes le de deba mo sa yue ba yina ane shene ngason jene marbe ngason ton yu su sanes jiden de le lo ne tsendele lo ne shimi dendo dönye jede jebu chungu tomu jebu chungu lang jene dödü dönye jede ane dödü dönye jede ane jebu chungu lang la dene jandu tomu wa da jebu chungu lo de jandu tomu wa nga so do ngal ji shi ta be ane konju le jiao sun ro yong ro de jandu tomu wa ma de jandu tomu wa nga so do ngal ji shi ta ne konju la jiao sun ro de jebu chungu de tomu wa de nga so do ngal ji shi ta ne ane konju la jiao sun ro de jebu chungu ro de ding ro de jebu chimi ro ye za tomu wa de jandu tomu wa ma de.
So then it says, be mindful of death. So be mindful that you will die. And if you have the karma and afflictions and you've accumulated a large amount of misdeeds, then you will fall to a miserable realm. So be mindful of death and reflect on how you will fall into a miserable realm after you die. You fall into a miserable realm after you die by accumulating misdeeds. So we find that we've done this since beginningless time. It says, turn your mind away from this world. So this is turn your mind away from the things of this life. Diligently seek a happy future rebirth. So turn away from the things of this life and seek rebirth in the higher realms of cyclic existence. And this is the goal of the small scope practitioner. So it says, if you strive to reject sin and to cultivate virtue through the standard practice of going for refuge, and through reflection upon virtuous and non-virtuous karma and certainly their results. So I'm going to stop there. So here it says the standard practice of going for refuge. This means the common practice of going for refuge. So in this section we're dealing with the small scope. So it's a small scope refuge. But that small scope refuge is in common with the medium scope and the great scope, because those practitioners wish to emerge from the lower realms of cyclic existence as well. So therefore, that's why it's called a common refuge. So this is a refuge that one goes for to be free from the lower realms of cyclic existence. So this is what is meant by, here it says the standard practice of going for refuge, and that's meaning of the common practice according to this particular scope. And we find that common practice being engaged in by the medium and great scope practitioner.
Less so. Dibung goa drubalam bebe dendru gobon to jansa ta mo ju chubung chutin ka to ju song ma tu na dibala sha na je ba yina anu wa de chubu chungun de bo dendru la da me de zan to wa de yong ma de de zan to ba de yong ge de to jang de ne de zan ji chuba ma je de sin de chubu chimbi de je ge shangju san ba zu ge nyang le xie go re ane jibu chung chu zang ma re den da zang ji chuba ma zin ji se jibu chung dang tumu yu san ba de jie ba dang din dang Tumoyu, Koa Tadala, Shambalubi, Samba, Jene, Telatene, Shanchu the Saint Jedes, Tiba Chimbal Tiago, what they Yunguaris, Chibu to Chumu the Tumu Lajeba, Did the Tumu Lajeba, then the Chibi Chimbi Shanchu Saint. Do you have the Chibi Chimbi Shanchu, Tiba Chimbal Tiade, to the Saint Jede, Chibu Chimbal Tribes, Chibun Dinki Samba, Jean Gudes, Chibu Chimbi Lonely Walla, then Chibun Dinki Samba Jean Guru, Jean Gude, the Tara, Jusen the Tara. Lami Kupon Tu Jang, Luigi Dungen Le, Mandebes, Ladan, Ledan Yomo, Ladami, Dazon Tu Jang, Chaban Luigi Dungen Le Mandebe, Tala Ranji, the one Zimbane, Tala Ranji, the one Zimbane, Ledan Yomo, Ongu, Ku, the one Ranji, the one Zimbane, Shinji Lulu, Sheres, Shinji Lu. Mata dunga tuwa dame mata dunga marbe dunga de yoro ne lada leda nyomo mo ongi lada me de wat ngalo ane de wat on de rede dunga de yoro se dunga wat de wan zamba shinjulu res shinjulu yimbe ya tabana de wa me de so wat de nego de wat on de ma de ya taban de wa yo mares 하양 대화도 뉴네 야자 코알쿠네 야자 아네 냐송지야 야단둘 지코라군 창데 그래 하양 냐르냐 바라 동유 타게비셔로스 주전코드 말로 지주야나
Okay, so then it says I'll just reread a little tiny part because he went over part of that sentence. If you strive to reject sin and to cultivate virtue through the standard practice of going for refuge and through reflection upon black and white karma, so here it says virtuous and non-virtuous karma, so it's the same, and the certainty of their results, you will achieve a happy rebirth, so a higher realm rebirth. So if you engage in the ethics which abandons the 10 non-virtuous activities, and if you do and then waver or engage in a negativity, acknowledge your downfalls, and then we, as a note, we've already gone over the standard practice of going for refuge. So by doing these things, one is able to achieve a higher realm rebirth, which is a happy rebirth. And then it says, however, do not be satisfied with this alone. After you have developed the attitude that is shared with persons of small capacity, this desire to emerge from the lower realms of cyclic existence, develop the attitude that is shared with persons of medium capacity, namely disgust with all of cyclic existence. So upon this basis of disgust with the lower realms of cyclic existence, then eventually recognize that all of the things within cyclic existence are suffering, and realize this and then be disgusted with cyclic existence. So this disgust is referring to renunciation, a desire to definitely emerge from cyclic existence. And from that basis, the desire to emerge from cyclic existence, you may aspire to become a person of great capacity by developing the spirit of supreme enlightenment. So this is referring to bodhicitta and showing how if you wish to achieve bodhicitta, you need the basis of the desire which is the desire to definitely emerge in the medium scope. And for that to emerge, you need the small scope. So these are bases for one another, and this is why that word common is used. Consequently, you must train in an attitude of a person of medium capacity. Why? Because even were you to reach the level of a deity or human, you would be mistaken if you believe this to be pleasurable by nature, since you still have not escaped the suffering of conditionality. So you have this pervasive compounded suffering. So the nature of cyclic existence is suffering. So that's what the nature of it is. So you still have these various types of suffering, one of which is the pervasive compounded suffering. Therefore, in reality, you would have no happiness whatsoever. Your life would still come to a bad end, for you would surely fall into the miserable realms again. So our karma and afflictions would force us into the miserable realms later on. if we didn't realize that these downfalls were present and didn't realize renunciation, a desire to definitely emerge. A human or divine lifetime is like resting on a precipice just before falling into the abyss.
Yankana, Nansua Jin Desa. That Yansalam Tunga Lama del Day, Yansakal Del Nasuja than Dabris. And then Nasudamatu Masano, then Ajin, Lata made the one over Inaya, then Yamayaja, and Lalje Melichin as one Jen Corajon, what the Deni Maris, that Susan Shunjule, Shobalan Juvale, Dundu Yanta. Yang won't Dawa Mabo Jenes, Lata May, Tenzon Yana to Lata May, Tenzon Tune, Dawa Mabo Peju Jebaina, Dawa Mabo Jene, Shene, Nasun Dungene, Yuri Mezena Tonsa, Shene Yaja Dene Yamare, and then Yaja Nasun Jene, and then Nasun Dunga Dungres, the Shunju to Sondu.
So if one is brought into cyclic existence by karma and afflictions, there is a necessary reality that things that we see as pleasurable by nature are truly suffering. So when we're in a human life, it's like we're just resting on a precipice. So we're enjoying the time that we have, but we're just standing on the edge of a cliff, which we will eventually fall from. There's no certainty of where we will be born in our next life. We can fall to the lower realms. We can become a human or a god again, but we will certainly cycle through all of these places. So there's no certainty. So this is why we're standing on a precipice, because in our next life we could very surely fall. And it's saying that we kind of disregard it. We see these things as pleasurable. And then we find a quote from the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by Shantideva, where it says, after repeatedly coming to happy rebirths, so again and again, circling in these happy rebirths and experiencing much joy there, you die and fall into the protracted and unbearable suffering of the miserable realms. So this is that circle that you go through, the higher realms and then sometimes the lower realms. There is no certainty of where you will be. Then we have a quote from Chenrezig Groman, letter to a student. He was a lay person, an Alanda scholar.
So when
Chenrezig Groman was a scholar of Nalanda, and when he arrived at the Nalanda Monastery, the other scholars asked him what he was really, what area of knowledge he was wise in. Jambe sent you the spoken words of Manjushri. The spoken words of Manjushri. It's Jambe Senchu is the Tibetan title. I believe that's the spoken words of Manjushri. So when he said this, all the other scholars became quite frightful, quite scared. So within that, there's a large amount of sutra and tantra teachings. Maybe that it's not Jambe Senchu. We'll stick with that. So even the scholars were scared because of this.
And the Chenrezig Pabal Nini Martangale Lorus, and the Chu Ngali Shiro Latin was, Kungal Shiro Latin war, as a Shiro Lagus,
Lesser.
What then Lugia?
So in the stories of Chandra Groman, we find that he engaged in great debates with the great master, the Dawadrapa, with the great master Chandrakirti. And they would be engaging in these debates, and then there would be a question raised, and then the next day, Chandra Groman would have no problem answering any of the questions that Chandrakirti was posing. And Chandrakirti couldn't figure out why this was, that he kept coming back with all of this knowledge. So one night he snuck to his room to see what was going on. Was he studying what was happening? And he saw that Chenrezig was there giving him the answers to all of these questions and giving him teachings on these answers. So then the great master Chandrakirti went to Chenrezig and said, "Will you help me? You're the Buddha of compassion. Please help me as well." And Chenrezig said, "You don't rely upon me as a wisdom deity, so we don't have that connection, so therefore I can't help you. I help Chandra Groman."
Hadame and Ku not to show ne, and the Hadame the Wajur, the Wazanla, and then at W this Hambasa. Nal the Wayu Samba, then what they your mothers, then never your mothers, then never Ome Rinji, Jatato, Duajanta Manjo, going to Chamba Jurosa, what they Roya mothers, then what they Joe Shamal, what the Matan Lata. Doari to mobile qual chandures, then your mares,
Lesser.
Shares on Sosa, Shenju to Dabdua.
So then Chandra Groman's quote from the letter to a student is very similar to the quote engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds, the Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It says, "You who whirl constantly in cyclic existence, yet who enter a happy realm mistaking mere calm for happiness, will certainly wander helplessly through hundreds of like and unlike realms." So you who whirl constantly in cyclic existence, circle cyclic existence, who enter a higher realm. So in the God's realms, there's a large amount of happiness and peace. But if they mistake that mere calm, that pleasant feeling for true happiness, they will necessarily wander helplessly in realms like that, and also realms unlike that. So there's no certainty because they don't have any independence. They don't have any say because they're forced into these various realms, high and low. Rinpoche, Jutsu J. And we'll take a short break, and we'll be right. Dead small.
What the neighbor what the Jimmy Chungu Lans on Chushi Mare, Jimmy did the Tungu Lans, Jimmy Chimmy Lal, Tauku, but then Dosa, Jaji with the Jim Chick.
So this second category deals with the dependency that the scopes have with one another. So how the one should not be just satisfied with the small scope, but it does serve as a basis for the medium scope, and the medium scope serves as a basis for the great scope. So this second section in Jayan Sheba's commentary on this great treatise on the state of the path to enlightenment is that.
Ta somba what the somba de what the coalition lo maguna madri sa coale nabanju ngaju samba de mana coal jo mare tabatu mares and what the madri what the tutabi in the long remba to gon reba to what the mantenga do sa ta somba de.
So the third category is that you have to familiarize yourself with the stages of these paths, because if you do not develop renunciation, you can't achieve liberation.
Oda somba tenere ti shir dindru la ya ngandu tanda shin to jo sha gu de sa dindru la da me ten de ya ane ngandu tanda wa ngandu le ngandu nyawa ya da dindru la so tu ngandu samba gomba najin dindru la ya wa de tadan rawa ji ge gongures
seldu
jo sha gu de jija pales
so
kebanan tore jang Kebanan Ture Jan nyawa tansu ji jin jurus keba soge wate turi la da me tenzon tene nyawa dan dawa tene nyawa tansu ji jin jurus nyawa la shigur ta shiu na ji ane keba so dendu la da me le da nyama mo dendu me tenzon la da me tenzon tele shigur ko tene yo marwote tenga ne ajanga kunzan woro wote nyawa tansu ji jin juru naba kundu tada la jis sigang jiba maji kunsa wa naba kundu keba zuwa de dendu yu le dan yumu kuwa dila ya ane wate jiba maji kumbri dendu yu tenzan le dan yumu moki dendu yu tenzan le tenzan shigu haris nga zon dan jawa nyawa dan jawa she dan zuwa dere.
Okay. So then it says, consequently, you have to become as thoroughly disenchanted with the happy realms as you are with the miserable realms. So here you have this fear of the lower realms of cyclic existence. You become disenchanted with them. You see their drawbacks. And then you should have that same amount of disenchantment with the happy realms, the higher realms of cyclic existence. So you're disenchanted with the hell, hungry ghost, and animals, but then you should also become this similarly disenchanted with the higher realms of cyclic existence. And then Aryadeva's 400 verses says, high states frighten the wise as much as hell. Rare is the state of existence that does not terrify them. So those higher states of the gods and humans that are brought upon by karma and afflictions scare the scholars just as much as the lowest hell realm. Because there is no certainty. So it says, rare is the state of existence that does not terrify them. All states of existence within cyclic existence terrify them. They wish to definitely emerge, those scholars. That's the point of Aryadeva's 400 verses. Quote.
Koa chabi idan dena tatu kurus koa li chabi kui dewa li chabi chaba yo kansu ngalo wate koa li koi de ndoa ridru koa resa song duwa she dansa Roma la timba le jan talu chanda kome injirwa cheta ruwa kun la deyi du she cheta ruwa kun la du le da nyo mo ruwa lada me ruwa kun la di du she ji tata temu ma ba shin tu ba juro sa ta ku de wal wa de khasa wa de wala di du she ji ba ina do san ta ba ina do du khen wa de do khen wa yin de len yu ji wa je yin be je do khen wa res do khen wa do san ta na an wa de temu she chi yong res ane cheta ruwa kun la dungen di shechi cheta ruwa kun la dungen wa ane dungen juyu dungen chabaru shechi dungen wadana ki dungen du gomba ina teta temu shintu samun jurus temu ma chon ruja res cheta doba gomba shintu pewa shedu na pewa duba gomba ku dewa tele ane dewa gomba na pewa teta docha majirado chowa juro sa lada me dewa tele wate chaba cheba ina ane docha mamba yung res docha chowa juro teta maduba gomba ina Maduba gomba, ane docha ga nyeba maduba gomba, tamu ga nyeba tende gomba, kondu nyeba shamba gomba, watu sule de gomba duye. Cheta madu gomba shinto pejo ba teta docha machi shinto shenjuro sa. She toma meba na sibi pensu la dewan zeba tang Shetuma Meban, Devi Kui Pensula Devan Zembatan, Dubi Naba, Drunduba, Gombi Nyebu Dungetan, Moduba Gomba Shena Tada, Dulasa. That Dungela Moduba Gora, Moduba Marve, Moduba Gona, what then, Duba Gomba the Nyebu Dures, da.
Lesser.
Dunduba Gombi Nyebu, Dukiamata, Dukiam Gungre, Moduba Gomba, Gonshena, Dukiamata, Moduba Gongina, Gonshena Tada, Dulasa, one de chat do the reason, sir.
So do.
Maguna Temutan, de chat pene. CB Kologon, CB Kolokorwa, Sombi CB Niemi, Gomba Net Show, somebody. Queen Yemi Maguna Kuala Madrid, the Gongo, those was somebody that the Tango those Jajibe.
Okay,
What is 100?
So now we have a quote from the verse summary of the perfection of wisdom in 8,000 lines. Those whose minds are attached to cyclic existence will continue to wander there constantly. So if you have a desire for cyclic existence, if you're attached, if you like it, then you will continue to cycle cyclic existence. And then we find in Chandra Groman's letter to a student, the more you conceive all beings as happy, the more dense the darkness of your delusion comes. The more you conceive all beings as suffering, the more the darkness of your delusions lessens. So you see that all beings are happy. This is a mistaken idea. We have to recognize that all beings are suffering. They are suffering because they have the various types of suffering, the suffering of change, the pervasive compounded suffering. So the recognition that beings are suffering gets rid of that darkness of your delusion that believes that they are not. So the delusion believes that they are not suffering, and that delusion is gotten rid of by recognizing that they are. The more you contemplate what is pleasant, the more the flames of attachment spread. The more you contemplate what is unpleasant, the more the flames of attachment abate. So this word pleasant and unpleasant sometimes are translated as beautiful or an ugliness or pure, impure. So when they talk about what is the antidote for attachment, it's meditation on what is unpleasant or ugliness. So that's the word in this that is being used, that antidote to attachment. We find when we look at antidotes in general, there are various antidotes to the various negativities. So the antidote to attachment is meditation upon ugliness, or the unpleasant. Antidote for anger or hatred is to meditate upon love. The antidote to delusion is to meditate upon dependent origination. So we begin to get into the antidote section, the antidotes to our delusions in this section. From beginningless time, the more you contemplate what is pleasant, so seeing these things as happy, as pleasant, the more the fire of your attachment spread, and then the flames go out when you contemplate the reality that the things are not, things are unpleasant. From beginningless time, you have been conditioned to believe that the wonders of cyclic existence are sources of happiness, and you have habitually projected upon them a false image of beauty. But if, as a remedy, you train yourself to meditate on suffering and unpleasantness, you will put an end to these wrong ideas. Chandra Groman says that if you neglect to meditate on these, ignorance and attachment will increase, and you will continue to fuel the process of cyclic existence. Hence, it is vitally important to meditate on the faults of cyclic existence. So this is section number 3 in Jayan Sheba's commentary. So then we get to this section where Lama Tsongkhapa actually places out his own outline, and it's this section we find 4. I know in the English there are 3, but we find the 4th category later on in later chapters. So the mental training, the measure of the determination to be free, dispelling misconceptions, and then ascertaining the path leading to liberation. These are the 4 categories, and it begins with the mental training.
So
the mental training is renunciation.
제비 모두네 근주고연데 이데모로 시비 편수지 녀미리는 탑이되와라 되니 처버지와 시질로서 고등아주 다음부터 대구에서 안데래도 상바정의지 대제비 소니 생금도 탑았더니로 쇼나트 생각을 제발라스 나는 상바지비세 달라로도 세워데 손데 네 연대 주주마고 어디 체지 다음부터 대선 지금도
Lesso.
이데모로 시비 편수지 녀미리는 탑이되와라 되니 처버지와 시질로서 되게 나는 상바정의다 대제비세 달라로도 세워son데 어디 연대 주주마도 대선.
So then, when we look at this great treatise and we find the first 3 categories, mental training, renunciation, the measure of the determination to be free, we find it qualified in Lama Tsongkhapa's 3 principal paths, that by constant meditation your mind will not entertain a moment's wish even for the successes of this life, and you will aim for freedom all day and night, then you experience transcendent renunciation. So this is the measure. And then we have dispelling misconceptions, that 3rd category. So all these are contained within bless me to perceive all that's wrong with the seemingly good things of this life. I can never get enough of them. They cannot be trusted. They are the door to every pain I have. Grant me then to strive instead for the happiness of freedom. So those 3 categories are all contained within this one stanza. So dispelling misconceptions again refers to the misconception that the renunciation is only a practice of the hearers and not one of the bodhisattva. And then the ascertaining the path leading to liberation is presented in this stanza, and this stanza then presents the truth of path and the truth of cessation implicitly. Grant that these pure thoughts may lead me to be watchful, to recall what I should be doing. Grant me to give the greatest care to make the vows of morality the essence of my practice. They are the root of Buddha's teaching. So we begin with a mental training, and there are 2 parts of the mental training. First, identifying the mind intent on liberation. And then the second category of the method for developing the mind intent on liberation. So these are the 2 categories under mental training.
타바 ngozwa tenne tune ji lo ta taba dundu ba bombas wate jaji betel saji sung diban rabndu taba ngozwa taba segen de kares taba ngozwa taba sene dunge bombe goden de la taba la marba khoa bombe goden de la taba ngozwa tenne ji lo sana taba tune ji lo de marba 인생구도 타바 되냐로 소나 생각 좀 제발아스 되냐로 안에 타바 준도바 봉바스 타바 준도바 봉바서 어때 자지 모들 사지 손 드는도 손지 사지 손 드는
Tambo the tarpa gitseni nandrabudu.
안에 어때 타바도 간다지 그래서 타바 ngoz으로 와 타바 ngoz으로 담으로 너무 타바셔봤네. Jimbal Joa Des, Tabasagan, the Jimbal Joa, Jimbal Joa. Masukara to the Dana Jimbal Marba. Kara to Lushabaina, to Lucasano, Jimbal Joa. Let on Yomo Jimbale, Masukuale, Rama, Deduga, the Len on Yomo Bichin the Ores. Let on Yomo Bichimbal Josuna, Taba. Taba Shebane, Jimbal Joba De, Jimbal Joba De, they on let on Yomo Nine, Koa Chinji in Lhasa. Let on Yomo Banine, what the Koa Chinjis, Nazukara numbers. And then I should do it and Yadula, Rama, but they go out there, let on Yomo Chindu waters. Turuma Maza, the Krak Chingurota. Could do it on Madeba there, let on Yomo Chin there is. Tell Josuna Taba. Let on Yomo Nine, Koa Chinji in Lhasa. Teniji Ongi, Kanji Ongi. Let on Yomo Kanji Ongi de Kala Suba, son dance, let on Yomo Bongi, de Kala Gendure, Zukan Gendure, Zume Kala Gendures, de Kala Suba, son dance, and then Shanas, Drugun Shebaina. Dua Ridro, Dua Ringa, say Yomarbe. Drugun Shebaina, Hala Subi, Nga, Trudans, Hala Suba, Natan, Dua Ridro, Dua Ringa. Dua Ringa Davaina, Lama in the Hadan Drums. Lama in Hadan Drambe, and Dua Ringa. Lama in Hadavaina, Dua Ridro. What in the Awures, what to the Kalesha wood.
Giant Sheba, the Ewa Yanja Suruna, the
Janjibo with the Saji, Tombal de Saji Sumre, Tabangozuma.
They get
to the energy law.
they do negare.
To the Tabatun Lut Karasana, Tabatun Lutres, to Lelabota. Tabatundu Pombo, Mates.
So there are three categories in this section. First, what is liberation? And then what is the mind intent on liberation? And then the third one I'm not sure of. I have to look it up in the text. I really want to create this outline properly. But it begins with, well, what is liberation? Liberation means freedom from bondage. So now we are bound by our karma and afflictions, like being tied up. And when we achieve liberations, we are untied, we are unbound. And it says what binds us, and what binds you to cyclic existence is karma and affliction. So it's saying that the karma and afflictions are like a rope, and that when you free yourself from the karma and afflictions, you are free. You have freedom from bondage, and you achieve the state of liberation. Under their power, the aggregates are reborn in a threefold manner. In terms of the three realms, they are reborn in the desire realm and so forth. So under the influence of karma and afflictions, you can be born into any among the three realms: the desire realm, the form realm, and the formless realm. So this is and so forth. In terms of kinds of beings, they are reborn as 5 or as 6 kinds of beings. So if we list cyclic, the 5 beings of cyclic existence, we just basically put the demigods into the gods category. If we say that there are 6 realms of cyclic existence, then demigods become a separate category. So we have the hell, hungry ghost, animal, human, God, if it's the 5-way, and it's hell, hungry ghost, human, demigod, God, if it's the 6-way. So this is the difference between the enumeration.
Lama Sekedo, Lama Sekedo Sayis.
Bless you.
Lama Ilhanan Down, Basu Chujiki, Lama Ilhanan Down Naris, Duaringa. Lama Iluka Donna, Duaritu.
So Basu Chuji Jetson says if we include the demigods within the God category of gods, then we only come up with 5 realms. But if we do not include the demigods in the category of the gods, then we come up with 6 realms. So that's in Basu Chuji Jetson's commentary.
what the Tabang Jimbale Troad, they are let on Yumaban in the Koa Ji in La, the Nijuanki, Kanjuanki, the Kala Soba Jivalan Satla Son Yuares, the Kanzu Kanzumekan, Sondan, Duishena, Dugune, Shebaina, Sala Soba, Nga, Trodans. Ha, and then I saw some me. Lamahi. So, Lamahi Lanal Joba in a nga. Lala Soba nga, Sana Lamahi, Lanal Joba ngaji. Lamahi Soso Joba in the truth, Jine Jugune, that Jine Jugune Basheba ina, Nele Jawa, Gungale Jawa, Dreshe, Duji, Maribe, what to look at she would. Jine Jugune, Nela Soba, Jesa, and the Jine Jugune Najela Soba Jeja Ures, Najas Amatu Jagan, Najero, Gonjin Tanga Shati, Gunga to Marbe Gunga, Chicken, Gungal Jebaro, Gonjije, and Gonjiji Treshe, Duji Tamatul Chicken, Matul Chicken, what is Dujil, Lamacho and Mandra, Judichoa, Judi Matul gentleman, Lat Matul knowledge.
Sumba.
Sipa Mama Pasi the Juji in Loyare, Pasi in the ministry. Pasi Juji in Loyare. What to look at their water, Juji. Nature again, I mean,
Lessa.
I mean, Elgin Mayore, and then what you read to Capicimento. Man, Hamai.
Chudan Sapo.
Ah,
the Sumba.
that Dressel was the Naso Sal Sabachasuna, and what the son of Momochon. Okay. What is the Dressel Jomento?
So do. Okay.
And Gungal, what the Gungal.
So do. Kangalasa.
What the college Judah?
Okay. So, in rereading, in terms of the three realms, these are the desire realm, the form realm, and formless realms. They are reborn in the desire realm, and so forth. In terms of kinds of being, they are reborn as 5. So, if we enumerate the 5 realms of cyclic existence, we enumerate the realms of cyclic existence by 5. The demigods become part of the category of God. If we enumerate this as 6 realms of cyclic existence, then the demigods have their own separate category. And in terms of type of birth, they are reborn in 4 ways: by birth from a womb, birth from eggs, birth from heat and moisture, and spontaneous birth. So birth from a womb is referring to being born from a mother's stomach, or from the womb of a mother. Rinpoche said a mother's stomach. Birth from eggs, so we see birds and so forth, chickens born from eggs. Birth from heat and moisture, that's referring to certain bugs that when there's moisture and heat together, they are born. And then spontaneous birth, certain deities have spontaneous birth. And then also in the intermediate state, we say there is this spontaneous birth as well. So, Charpamajo.
Maynangel Chana Melgungal Joe Mabatasana, Gungal Joe. Gungal Joe and Gungal Ji Mayo Marvesana. Chonchon Legend, Nede Tatane, Nedata Sena Pombajis, Shat Chonchon Legibi, Nede Tata Nedas Gini, Nede Tata Nedas Jagalni John Yerudat, Kushadil Jibero, Shat Chonchon. Chudung Guanol Jingiruta. What the Gonjer is that? Chudung Lishi, Nede Tata Nerata, Gungal Jivres. Mayina Neji in Macho Gonje, Nede Tata Neda in the Jas. So
in the Vinaya text, do we say that a human is only born from the womb And the answer is no. We find a quote that states, and there's a story, I'm sorry I couldn't understand some of it, but there is a story of a being who was born, a human, from an egg. So because there is that story, then we say that this isn't necessarily so, that a human has to be born from a womb. So this heat and moisture, to understand, is quite difficult. Bite. Bug bite. So there are certain bugs that eat your blood, and Rinpoche is saying that it might have something to do with heat and moisture, but I'm not understanding. Then Garshine, the Bu Suja, the Chakra.
That's how long you was So
I think that the main point is that where there are warm places, we have a lot of bugs that are born. And I'm sorry, I can't quite why that would be that, why that's a birth. So I apologize. So the subject is there a birth of an egg? So ants have eggs. So we have to think about all of these different things. Chun chun, garpo chun chun yure. So are all bugs? Well, then the ant is born from heat and moisture. Well, an ant is born from an egg. So that's when you start to analyze these different things. Now I understand, except the blood part.
타바드니 lut 쇼스나 타반도 토반되바 타반되바 타바드도 니 루사 타바드니 lut 쇼스나 어드레스트 사지.
So the next point of the second category of Jayan Sheva's commentary is identifying this mind, what the mind intent on liberation is. So it says, since this is the nature of bondage, freedom from rebirth impelled by karma and afflictions is liberation, and the desire to obtain that freedom is the mind intent on liberation. The third category is to achieve liberation, what is destroyed or what is abandoned.
레뉴진 도시바 레뉴진 도지 전에 시발라 맞아서 어때 하는 가서 어때 도지 좋지네 가는 말에 계진이 받은 가는 거로다 가보 어떤 질 타바자 주요 말이지 레도 녀모 먹이 제바이나 하는 롱하망 뭐 다른 요 말로다 론들요 말로 가정 뭐 데리요 말로 계진 가서로다 데리고 뭐 손이요 말로 가는 거로다 뭐 타바든 질 자주요 말이지 보다 레도 녀모 먹지 계진이 받은 가바든 질라 타바자 나오들 로타레스다 대샤주요 말에스 네부 공부 따지 돈이 두비 쉐로라서 네부 공부 따지 레도 녀모 번가는 받을라 타발라고 그랬어.
Okay, so the third category, moment by moment, the compositional activity of karma and the afflictions arises and is destroyed. But this destruction is not liberation. Though things that have been produced do not abide for a second moment, this destruction is not contingent upon conditions for liberation, such as the cultivation of a remedy, knowledge of selflessness. If it were liberation, it would follow that everyone would be liberated without effort, and that would be absurd. Consequently, if you fail to cultivate the remedy, you will be reborn in the future, since you only stop rebirth by cultivating the remedy. So here, we're not stating that that this is liberation. The wisdom realizing emptiness is what destroys the karma and afflictions and then leads to liberation. So moment by moment, the compositional activity of karma and the afflictions arises and is destroyed, but this destruction is not liberation. So yesterday's end and today's end doesn't mean that there's a liberation. It means there has to be a remedy presented, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So just the days going by, or the stopping of the actions themselves, isn't the destruction of the action, which then is liberation. It is referring to the actual abandonment of the karma and afflictions by way of the wisdom realizing emptiness.
샤부드마 다와드마 네 샤부지래 추저 가제래 니주사지 말베 추저 니주사지 말베 추저 니주사지래 네 추저지래 감 가제래
60 주주
어때 가마레는 가는 거로 말베 가는 거로다 가서 하고 말다 보고 주준 거네 가서 깨지 가는 거로다 개베 찬로다 어떤 가서 쉬고 말다.
So we don't understand or know this, but we're slowly, as things end, because of the momentary nature, evolving. And as things, one moment arises, it's over, and a second moment arises, and then that's over. So there is this destruction that takes place. But if we look at it, in 1 month, for instance, there are 4 weeks, and in 4 weeks, and in a week, there are 7 days, and in a day, there are 24 hours, and in 24 hours, how many minutes are in an hour? There are 60 minutes. How many seconds are in a minute? So we see that there is a momentary nature of things that are happening, but we really don't recognize it happening. We suddenly are 50, we're suddenly 60, and those moments of younger years have been abandoned. And we're now here, but we're not recognizing that kind of disintegration that's taking place. We don't see it. Because momentary things stop, that doesn't mean it's liberation. Liberation is...
So the
karma and afflictions that by as moments pass are ending doesn't refer to liberation from them.
So
liberation requires a remedy or an antidote, and the wisdom realizing emptiness, when applied to the karma and afflictions, serves as an antidote, and then one achieves liberation. But this momentary destruction isn't liberation.
Lenyu dushi ne shiba la majate ledo nyomo wangi dushi keji ngan raji wotani jil taba shaju mares chone shiba la majate jeba na tuni ba medeba jesa shinje de la keji niba de mares medeba ne nyabu gombi taji nyabu gomba suje Chen Matubis, Keji Gandria de Niabukumba to Markungan, Matubis, Tanji Jang, Bemen to draw Tai Jun Juros, Keji Gaba Teletane, Tabazabaina, and then was Samalotene, Kalimabatan, quality in Tabatuatas, Tubatanu resident. Jun Jurosa. Wana tabat kaneja tena nebu majina 마우바 니상 조아 니에보 제비 또지 니상 조아 로바 was 타바스 어디자고레스
Let's up.
니에보 공부 또지 레도 녀모 그 조아 니상 조아데
Let's up.
가바데 타바 어디자고레스다
Moment by moment, the compositional activity of karma and the afflictions arises and is destroyed. But this destruction is not liberation. The things that have been produced do not abide for a second moment. So we have the momentary nature of things, the first moment, second moment. So the second moment, they aren't abiding, but this destruction is not contingent upon conditions for liberation, such as the cultivation of a remedy. So a remedy hasn't been put forth. This destruction is not liberation. If this were liberation, it would follow that everyone would be liberated without effort, and that is absurd. Consequently, if you fail to cultivate the remedy, you will be reborn in the future, since you only stop rebirth by cultivating a remedy. You only stop rebirth by cultivating a remedy for the karma and the afflictions. If that remedy is not present, then you will take on another rebirth and you aren't liberated. Dixon. So today what you know is very good. What you understand is very good. So we'll do the Hua Dixon.
Okay,
Concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well. With whatever dedication is praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the three times, I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land, surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Wandak, upholder of scriptural and realizational doctrines, a spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche Gucci Shapi Denro.
Okay.
That's Lamrim Chenmo.
Yeah.